right from the start. It's a topic that sort of has multiple meanings, and what I'm wanting to do is actually talk a little bit about the process of bonsai that I follow, and how I end up with the trees that I end up with. So let me just see. Go here. Okay, right, that's how it's working. Okay, so as I mentioned, process of bonsai. It's a topic that was introduced by Werner Bubb in 1995, so at the Oyama 10th anniversary. Anybody else on this group with the Oyama 10th anniversary? I suspect not. Peter, when did Peter join? I'm not sure. But anyway, 10th anniversary, we had Werner Bubb and Rudy Adam presenting, and Werner was speaking about the process of bonsai, and the analogy that he spoke about was the way in which when you find a tree, you're developing a bonsai tree, you start off, let's try and here is their laser pointer. Now let's use the thing. You start off with you find a particular piece of stock with a certain quality, whether that's a nursery material or collected material or whatever, generally nursery or collected on this analogy, and you have a certain quality over time. Then through the process of collecting or the initial design work on the tree, the quality actually drops off dramatically. And what you need to do as a bonsai grower is you need to get it down to its essence and then start developing the tree as a decent bonsai. And then what will happen is your quality will then start overtaking the quality that you were originally at over a certain period of time. And then what can happen is you can either plateau, so you end up with a bonsai of a particular quality, and I guess depending on your skill levels, you'll then just have a tree of a constant quality. But if your skill levels change or improve, or as you work on the tree, you then start getting your quality to improve. So there's initial rapid increase in quality, and then your quality would improve. And that was very much the process of bonsai that Werner was introducing and discussing. And I think it's a useful analogy and useful way to think about the way in which your bonsai are working, and then also look at when you've got trees in this sort of region, to actually assess, is the quality just flat, or is the quality actually improving over time? Sometimes what you might have is you might have a workshop or some event like that, and then your tree might take a sudden jump in quality, or you might even go back down and then take a jump in the quality. But it's useful to think about it. So just some inspiration, and I think it's a very important aspect to think about as well, because our sources of inspiration and where we come from for our bonsai definitely governs the kinds of trees that we particularly enjoy. So these are some images of Newlands Forest taken off the web, and this is where as a sort of young teenager, I was often dragged for walks into Newlands Forest, but I particularly enjoyed this kind of environment. So it's dense forested environment, moist, damp, filled with fairies, interesting features of roots and rotted out features in deadwood and things like that. And so this is really the history of where I come from for my bonsai inspiration. But if we were to take somebody like Freddie Bischoff, then a lot of his inspiration comes from Namibia and the environment where he grew up from. And so when people would then be inspired by pear leaf paintings, pear leaf etchings, the combination with termites and trees, this kind of shape of tree that one sees in Namibia, this is the kind of forested landscape. And so depending on your place of origin, or where you're drawing your inspiration from, the kinds of trees you'll develop will be quite different. And then also artistic inspiration, and this particular book, Bonsai Art of Kimura, was very influential in the sort of early 1990s when it was first arrived in South Africa. I think the first copy arrived with Ken Doble, and Vicky and myself, just kind of ate this book up. We just couldn't get enough of the amazing inspiration that was being introduced, and the transformation in the thinking that was being espoused in this book. And you know, one of the classic examples is this yew tree, which was really very arbitrary, very poor piece of material, and that is the tree that has actually been developed.
It's very light.
Phil, somebody seems to be talking. Sorry, we muted again. Good. Okay. So we started with a yew tree looking like that, and ended up with a tree that looked like that, and that was just completely mind blowing for Ken, myself, Len, and the people that were playing around with trees at that time. It's important to remember that this tree is a large tree, and so even though this live vein appears to be quite thin, it is actually quite a substantial piece of tree still to actually keep it alive. And Vicky has actually found images of this tree, and they're sitting in Spain. It's actually
come and look at that. Come and look at the things.
Henny, can you mute?
Oh, sorry.
Thanks, Henny. Anyway, so this tree is now in Spain. I'm just trying to struggle with memory of which nursery it's in, but it is in Spain now, many years down the line. Okay, so you can see the transformation that occurred, and that was hugely inspirational for us. But then also Kimura was doing trees that were much more, I don't think we could say ordinary, but much more conventional and much more classical. And he would take a tree like that and he would refine it and turn it into a much more beautiful image, looking like that. And so, you know, this is the kind of work that really influenced a lot of our earlier thinking in the bonsai. And then you have the very famous Resurrection, which was also featured in that book. And this is again, you know, a remarkable process of bonsai, where this particular tree arrived in Kimura's nursery. It was basically dead. You can see that the foliage is extremely unhappy. When Kimura investigated the root base, all of this section was dead. There was no life in the tree. Just these little bits had a little bit of life in them. And what he did was, you know, he was investigating the tree. He noticed that there was no life in the base. And so what he actually did was he turned the tree upside down. And this is the original root base up here. Can everybody see the arrow? I'm just checking that we do have the arrow on the screen. So the top of this tree, you can see it, great. So the top of the tree, sorry, the bottom of the tree became the top of the tree, and the living parts were then protected and packed with sphagnum moss, and the tree started growing. And one of the intriguing things in the book was they say, you know, in 7 days there were roots already visible on the tree, and when we read that, we just thought, no, this is madness. You know, there's no ways that this development could happen, and so it must be some lost in translation. But now, actually, interestingly, with the introduction of things like sphagnum moss and akadama into bonsai culture in Cape Town, that sort of rapidity of growth and development does actually occur, and so, you know, it is actually probably, it's true. Then Kimura you know, used his skills in carving. That's how the tree started looking. So you can see, you know, freshly potted in akadama. You can see the very unhealthy foliage over there, and then the rest of the deadwood going up in there. And he thinned it down and refined it and sculpted it and ended up producing a tree that looked like that, which again for us was just completely amazing. You know, it's really creating abstract sculpture rather than bonsai. And this is how the tree has progressed over time. So that's when it was first started. This is a picture that was in the book as the Shinpaku foliage is beginning to grow up. And then this is the tree developing over time. And so, you know, if we think about that analogy of the quality of the tree, you're starting with very low quality, then the quality starts improving, and over time the tree gets better and better and changes quite considerably, and becomes not more conventional, but certainly more like a tree, you know, less like a sculpture and more like a tree. And this is the progress over probably about 20 or 30 years of development, and various pictures scrounged off the internet every time I see a picture of the resurrection, I try and grab it and hope that it's a more recent one. So, you know, this leads on to the thinking, you know, if we think about the original trajectory the trees are taking, it's important to consider the right technique. Because what might happen is you might take your quality piece of material, you design it, and then through using wrong techniques and wrong methods, the tree never really recovers and it just stays as poor quality. And examples would be like this maple tree. Was collected from Boschendal Nursery, Boschendal Wine Farm in the early 90s, late 80s. And, you know, I enjoyed the trunk. I really liked the shape of the tree. But what happened was I allowed the growth, you know, long branches to actually grow out. And then I wired those branches into shape. And that resulted in each internode being about, you know, between 3 and 5 centimeters apart. And so no matter how hard I tried, I just wasn't able to actually get any decent ramification on the tree. And so you can see here, you know, even as it was developing as quite a mature bonsai, I still, you know, had these major problems of these big internodes just continuing to plague the bottom parts of the tree. The top part you can see was grown with better technique, and you can see the ramification at the top ends up looking a lot better. And so, you know, and here's an example of, you know, a tree. This is probably a Celtis tree, but grown with correct technique, and the way in which the ramification and the beauty of the tree is dramatically better. The second tree that I collected from Boschendal, and again, you know, this tree I sort of learned from those errors, and I started pruning the branches in a better way so that we actually got better development. But then we had this very ugly root that was over here, this great big root here. And so what I did was I actually split that root in half, you know, carved it out. And you can see over time, you know, again, if you think about that analogy of the improvement over time, that's when it's freshly cut and then going up to the top right as it matures and it starts looking more and more like 2 separate roots rather than one great big thick root. And this is the tree some years later, and that ugliness on the base is a bit better. It's certainly nowhere close to the kind of quality of Nibarian bases that we're producing nowadays, that with grafting and base layering and other techniques that can be used. A pine tree, again, showing really just the passage of time and the importance of just allowing the tree to develop. So that's shortly, well, it's a seedling tree, 2000. That's 9 years later. You can see that I actually allowed, you know, this top section here was wound around a broomstick to create this very, very twisted Harai kind of shape. But then also it was allowed to grow and develop, and those lower branches were allowed to develop as sacrifice branches. Another 11 years later, and we have a tree looking like that. And that was last year when I finally did some better refinement on the branch structure. So again, 21-year process, which is a little disappointing because, you know, I looked at the tree and I thought, oh wow, you know, this tree's developing really nice and rapidly. That's fantastic. But then realized that it was 21 years of development, which is a little bit of a right sizing exercise and made me feel old. But that's what happens over time, what can be achieved over periods of time. Creativity and vision, I think, are also very important components. So again, you know, if we think of if you're starting off with material and you've got decent creativity and decent vision, you might reduce the quality dramatically, but the future of the tree is really, really significantly improved. Whereas lacking a creativity and vision means that you will, you know, make the tree look somewhat worse, and then you just, without, you know, because you don't have any vision or creativity, the tree just stays in that kind of state of you know, incompleteness. So this is an article that was published in Bonsai Europe some years ago, and the challenge for me here was to take a young, very immature juniper. It was a 5-row tree in a junk pile somewhere, and just test the limits to see how far it could be bent. And so I used various techniques. I drilled some holes into it to brace it, and then I cut a wedge out and I did this bend. The other innovation and creativity was this use of drilling a hole through the trunk and then putting a little block at the back of the trunk and then feeding your wire through. And then that allows you to actually bend the trunk or the branch in an extremely precise way. You're not having to rely on wire or something looped around the trunk, because in this position here, it would just slip out of the way and you just wouldn't be able to get decent anchoring. So by running the anchor through the branch or through the trunk, you can get extremely precise control of the bending. And the other benefit is that you get a very minor amount of damage on the trunk. So you get a pressure point at the back here, which causes some death, and you've got a little hole on this side. And so that injury would actually heal up very quickly once you take the wire out. And that's an example of using creativity to solve a problem that I was facing. So that's the tree in the initial bend, and then I put some heavy wire onto it, and then I started bending it around and playing around, and ended up with a tree looking like that. And as I say, the project was to see how far I could actually bend the tree before too much bending was done. The tree survived down to this point here. This 90-degree bend actually broke the trunk, and everything below that actually died off. So that's what the tree looked like some years later. And you can see that the shape was quite well established and was developing as an interesting cascade. Sadly, that tree isn't with us anymore. That repotting exercise ended up with it dying, which was very disappointing because it was a fun and exciting project. Moving on from that technique of putting the drilling through the trunk and creating that block and that brace point. You can even do it with cable ties. So in this particular fig tree here, what I did was I drilled a hole through there, I drilled a hole through there, I stuck a cable tie in on that side, and then I took the block of the cable tie on the other side, and then you just zip the cable tie up, zip, and then you can actually create a bend in that tree. So this was a perfectly straight tree when I started, and I got that bend in to start with, and then using some blocks and stays, I got that second bend in. Some more creativity here. This is an olive tree that was collected, and unfortunately, again, the collection didn't work, so the tree didn't survive. So I guess you could actually then say that the quality dropped down to an extremely low level on the tree. But then what I did was I thought about actually creating a phoenix graft, and instead of using the junipers, which phoenix grafts very often use, I actually experimented with pine trees, and the black pine has actually worked very well. It's actually attached to the trunk very nicely and is actually developing very, very well. So I'm quite happy with how this one is developing. The difficult swamp. So this is a demonstration that was done in 2009. Quite a lot of you will probably know this tree. It now belongs to Dawn Collier up to the nursery. Worth going to have a look at there, and also very much worth going to a nursery to have a look, because she's doing some wonderful things up there. That's what the tree started out as. It had this really difficult sort of V-shaped trunk area there. Very nice old tree, had some really nice character, nice base and nice trunk, but you know, just had this problem with this V. So Friday the 3rd of whatever it is it March, May? I can't remember which particular month it was. In my diary, I just was sketching away, and then just had the idea. And I think this is one of the things is, you know, creativity and inspiration hit at all sorts of strange times and places. And so, you know, it's always useful having some kind of way of making notes, you know, everywhere you go. And, you know, I suddenly thought, well, what we could do is you could change the angle, and we could actually then create one of these as an apex and bring one out as a major first branch. So that's what the tree looked like with the angle change, and then some thoughts around where I'd put the deadwood. And that's a development of the thoughts, you know, just a bad photograph that was printed out on a black and white printer, and then threw some sketchy stuff over the top of it to try and get an idea of where it was going. So this is the demonstration that was done at that Cape Regional event. So there's the tree as it started. There's the finding the new front and changing the planting angle, also working out where the deadwood was going to go, then working on the tree, and then this is actually what ended up being done. Again, using some creative braces and stays to get some changes in the trunk angles, and this turnbuckle here was used to push this V apart. So you can actually see it there. So that's the V before it was pushed apart, and here's the turnbuckle in here, having pushed these two quite far apart. And then we end up with a very nicely well-defined apex and a very nice big first branch. So again, the turnbuckle and the way in which it was anchored with little screws into the wood, which ended up creating minimal damage in that region, although the V actually did split and crack as I was opening it up. So that's what the tree looked like when it was freshly done, angled, wired, and positioned. And that's when I'd repotted it and how the tree looked at that point. So that's 2006 to 2009. And then we're just giving it some time to develop and hopefully allow the tree to improve in quality. So that's 2011. Then 2013, you can see it had been allowed to grow really quite dramatically, and the amount of healing, and that's something to remember with larger swamp cypresses, is that they heal really quite dramatically. And I'm not sure whether it's actually closed up completely, but I know Dawn was worried that shari at the front was actually going to close up totally. 2017, you can see the tree is now maturing up and beginning to take on a very nice shape, I think. And that was in October 2017, shortly before, in fact, a few hours before I sold it. But it was an exciting project and really creatively a very stimulating exercise. So as you saw from that example, giving a tree some time definitely helps. And here's some longer time perspectives. This is an acacia tree, one of the robusta acacias that came from Kirstenbosch originally in the 1940s. And this is what it looked like in 1975, a photograph from the Cape Bonsai Kai's 5th anniversary magazine. And I think this is one of the very important things that we need to remember, to somehow archive images and keep track of pictures. And certainly in a printed form, they can go into a library and they can stay in that library for 40 years and then be retrieved at stages when you need them. And so it's something to think about, and how we actually keep these repositories of information in the form of photographs and history of our trees. So that's a tree in 1975, and this is Bernard's tree in 1992. So you're looking at sort of almost 20 years later, very, very beautiful acacia robusta developing as a flat top tree. Then in 1995, we managed to pull all the trees together at a Oyama exhibition. So this is Bernard's tree over here. This is my one that I acquired from Ken Doble. This is Willie Romain's one that was bought from, Bernard sold it to Rudy, and then Rudy got it from Rudy got it from Bernard, and then Willie got it from Rudy. This was one of them. So that was the sort of the legendary 5th one that suddenly turned up at Neville Coxon's property, and well, he had it, and I ended up buying it. And then there was this tree that Len bought from another Oyama member. So where these trees are now, these two trees I actually own, and they are still alive. So they're from the 1940s in Kirstenbosch. This tree, I did a typical me dramatic redesign. I was very happy with the design, but the tree wasn't happy with the design and was very weak, and so didn't actually survive. This tree has died. I know that tree is no longer. I'm not sure what has happened to this tree, the one that Len owned. So again, it's interesting to see the way in which trees have long histories, and some survive and some don't. This is the history of this particular acacia in the time that I've had it. So I bought it. Well, this is in 1993 when it belonged to Ken Doble. When Ken moved to Australia, he sold it to me, and then this is me owning it from '94. It then, again, the design really wasn't quite working for me. This very sharp bend at the top, really, I wasn't happy with. And so I allowed it to just grow on a bit. I stopped looking after it properly. 2004, it was looking like that. And then in 2005, I did a major redesign work on the tree and refined the branches and then brought a new apex up. And that was successful in that this apex started extending the trunk. And so we ended up with, I think, a much more successful tree. Still not the ideal tree, but much more successful. The aged bark is really quite special, and that's something that you can't really get with time, without lots and lots of time. And this is the tree as it was exhibited at the African Bonsai Convention in Stellenbosch in 2016. And I had called it First Rains because it was just budding out as all in light green foliage. And as you probably gather, I enjoy these kinds of trees that have these long histories. This is a fairly shorter history, but also interesting the way it developed. It's a psyche that I developed, so that's the pot that I started with. Then I had some stones that were collected in the Cedarburg. They were then cut and arranged and put into the pot. I then got a series of Procumbens junipers from Rudy and put them together into this arrangement, planning it for the Cape Town Flower Show that happened in 2004. And that was the end of the demonstration at the Cape Town Flower Show. And you can see the way in which the psyche has then matured over time, ending up in a more attractive planting. So again, the way in which the quality starts off at a reasonable quality, and then you drop the quality dramatically when you get it into the initial planting, the initial design, and then you improve the quality again over time. Okay, then we have the right stock that you need to use, and again, the species or even the variety is important with the tree. So if we have a different qualities of materials, so this is a quality piece of material that we're starting with, the quality drops and then we improve it. Otherwise, if you choose inferior stocks, either inferior type of tree or inferior species, or just a really poor specimen, you then drop the quality. But it's really, really hard to get that quality back up to the quality that you would have if you're starting with really, really good material. You can do it over time if the variety is good, if the species is good, but it does take a lot of work. And so really for me, the take-home message is start with the best quality you can, because then you'll end up with a better tree. 1988, my tree collection. I was proud enough of these trees to actually try put some effort into taking some photographs of them. But and this is where I started. But then if you're working with material like this, there's just a certain limit to where these trees can get to if you keep growing them in pots and developing them as bonsai. Whereas if we start with more interesting material, more interesting quality of material, you then end up with much more interesting and better trees. So that's a fig species, not exactly sure which species it is. This is a Procumbens juniper used in the very first demonstration of and I've just forgotten the name of it, marginal stock, 1997 Bonsai Convention. Again, over time, starting off with the best material that I could possibly find for a wisteria at that time. So that's I actually got the tree in the mid-90s. This is what the tree looked like in 2000. Then in 2000, again, so a little bit later in 2000, flowering for the first time, absolutely over the moon, super excited by it. But now I look at the tree and just all the faults come up, the root base, the matching to the pot, the straight trunk, all of these things. But these quality issues then did improve over time. I changed the front of the tree, the density of foliage improved, the flowering improved, that's 2001. Then it became very apically dominant because I wasn't maintaining the strength around the tree properly. So you can see that in 2004, these lower branches were looking very, very unhealthy and really looked as if they were about to die. I did give it a very heavy prune, thought I'd pruned it too much, so the apex was going to die, but then it did all come back again. And 2 years later, that was the display that I got. And, it really is sort of one of the kind of iconic photographs of the wisteria that I've taken. And again, you can see the change in the pot over time as well, as I was able to get better and better quality pots. Then I put it into this pot. That's 2017. You can see the whole tree has matured more. There's that kind of stability in the tree, and in Japan they very often talk about a feature of trees called mochikomi, which is time in a container or time in a pot. And time as a bonsai develops and starts showing itself, and the maturity of the tree improves over time. And that's the display that I did at it's actually a couple of years back, because you can see that it's in the oval pot, but just allowed me to kind of express creativity with a painting that my then 2-year-old daughter created, and I blew it up and printed it big, and just was a fun and creative display that was done there. Marginal stock, the original marginal stock tree that I worked on initially. So I featured the redesign of this tree in 2017, and then looking at 2021, so I'm trying to make sense of the dates at the bottom there, probably when I repotted it, September 2021, maybe the pictures, or when I repotted it, probably when I repotted it. So that's what the tree looked like when it started. Again, a bit of an iconic tree. It was an air layering that Ken Doble did of a big deodar cedar that he had. It took about 3 years to develop roots, and then it was just this totally bizarre, ugly lump of wood that really, I don't know what we could do with it. And that's really where the idea of marginal stock came in. We've got a piece of material that looks like this. It's extremely low quality. You don't lose anything by experimenting on it. So just try something very different, be unique, be as creative as you possibly can, and see where you go with it. If the tree doesn't survive, well, it's a pity that the tree didn't survive, but you haven't lost a major investment in either quality of tree or time. So it made an upright cascade, which was quite astounding to many people, and a lot of people struggled with what I was trying to do with the tree. And that's how the tree developed. So that's some years later. And what you can see is the way in which being a deodar cedar, they just like growing at the top. The foliage grows at the top. You can see the weakness at the bottom, and over time, that particular tree just became weaker and weaker, and that bottom of the tree died off, and the sort of the original first branch and the original apex were the bits that survived. And so for the Black Scissors event, I took the tree from that angle and then repositioned it into this angle, and then started working on it and designed it, killed off this whole region here, got the trunk line back up to here, and then developed and worked on that trunk line. And so that's what the tree looked like at the end of the Black Scissors demonstration. And again, interesting. It's taking on the history of the original upright cascade, but it's then being more suitable, more appropriate for the growth habit of that particular species of tree. This was the pot that I wanted to match it with, and this is the tree in that pot and growing. It went through a bad phase when it was here. It was in this pot for a period of time and was growing quite strongly, and then stopped growing, and it had actually suffered quite considerable root rot. There were very, very few roots left on the tree, and so putting it into that new pot, bit of a wish and a prayer, wired it in very firmly, and it has started growing again. It's taking a little bit of time to get going, but it is still growing, which is a great relief. So it's quite remarkable to think that over the years you started with something that looked like that, and we ended up with something that looked like that. And I think it also demonstrates the change in the philosophy around my bonsai, and how I view design and things like that. And that's another aspect of the time that I enjoy. So all together now, if we actually take all of these ideas and we put them all together, we have this Acer bergeronum, or trident maple tree, collected from Boschendal, similar place, same places as those other maples that I was talking about. But what I was able to do was take the lessons from those maples and apply it to this particular tree. It was a natural raft, so that a tree that had been knocked over, and then there'd been a new leader that had shot up very strongly. And so when I saw this tree, you know, this is the whole raft that came out. Len Redfern and myself dug it out, and in negotiation with Len, I just said, I just want this bottom part, and Len, we can keep the rest of the tree. So he was quite happy with that. But you know, the vision, I just saw this tree here, and I just got really excited by the movement in that trunk. And what I was looking at was the change in the planting angle, and actually putting it into the, you know, putting it back into the original position before the raft formed. So before it fell over, we put it back up into that position and allow it to start developing. So that's what the tree looked like when it was freshly potted. And then it started developing, and you can see the way in which I was using pruning techniques to actually improve the quality of the branch development and ramification. And then I did grafting at the bottom of the tree over here. So you can see the graft that's actually developed. Well, these are the in-arch grafts that were done. And this is a bottom view of the branches and the way in which I was able to get much more dense ramification and more appropriate and more attractive branch structure on the tree. This is an example of winter pruning. So you can see there's a strong branch that was growing out here, and through winter pruning that was removed, and you can see the structure that was being developed, and cutting it short, cutting to buds that were useful, and maintaining and developing that structure. Side view of that same winter pruning exercise, and you can see the way in which the heavy superfluous stuff was removed, and I was able to get a much better, a much more powerful branch structure on the tree. This is what happened with the root grafts. So I did the initial grafting. I think I put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 grafts into the tree. As it always happens, the 2 grafts at the back of the tree fused and grew beautifully. The 4 grafts at the front decided not to grow. So then some years later, I then had to re-attempt the grafts, and those ones actually took and developed, and it allowed me to actually develop a much more attractive nabari for the tree. So you can see, using good technique on the base for the nabari, good technique at the top of the tree to get your foliage development, good vision and creativity, you know, just getting the trunk that I wanted, quality dropping off dramatically as I pruned it, and then the quality re-emerging over time, allowing the tree to develop over time, and matching with different pots to develop the tree. And that's what the tree looked like at the ABC exhibition in 2016, with a very carefully matched pot that I'd actually bought direct from Japan, and was very, very happy with the combination and the way the tree was looking. So, you know, it developed in a very, very attractive way. So I used the right stock, had the right vision, right amount of time, right technique, right pot, matched with the right stand. But the big problem that I realized was it was the wrong design. And, you know, everybody talks about this as being my pine tree maple. And it is, you know, basically I was designing it in the shape of a pine tree, and the branch structure was designed with that in mind. The shape of the canopy was designed with that in mind. And so what I now need to do is, the tree's got to a certain point, but I now need to actually do a redesign and bring it back into alignment with the philosophy around the design of maple trees, and actually make it look more like a maple tree. And that's an area where I'm actually really, really struggling. So, you know, hopefully what you get from this presentation is the way in which trees develop. You need to choose the best material you can find and give them some time to develop, and sometimes we make mistakes, and this is an opportunity now to actually do a redesign on the tree and let it develop. Okay, so that's the end of the presentation. We can certainly open up to any questions if anybody's got any questions, and we can go from there. So thanks very much.